I was excited to be. It is Easter Eve. Anybody who knows me knows that I love the Eves. I want to explain my love of the Eves. Okay, you have New Year's Eve. That's the obvious. Christmas Eve, a big one. I have Halloween Eve. I have Hallow Eve. I have Birthday Eve every week. Instead of Thursday, I have Friday Eve. And Eves are important because they're about anticipation. Years ago, I talked about in a stand-up show that I did, and I felt it, and I still feel it, that I talked about how when I was a little girl, I loved Thursday more than Friday. Because once it was Friday, it was Friday. It was happening, and it was in the moment. And how many of us have had an important event, whether it was a wedding or three, or an important quinceañera, anniversary party. My girlfriend Cindy had an 80th for her father, 80th birthday surprise party that I performed at. And you know, when you talk about anticipation, think about Carly Simon, Anticipation. Who didn't love that song? Who can't remember the ketchup commercial? Who can't remember the ketchup, just like, you know, it's so rich. And the thing about that song, I was thinking about it today, because think about the words to anticipation, to Eves, to Thursdays, to Easter Eve. We may never know about the days to come, but we think about them anyway. I got to do it. AA. And if you think about even going a little further, the love connection, you know, if I'm really with you now or just chasing some finer day. No, I'm really with you now, in this now. I'm not chasing a finer day. I'm in the here and now of what this situation is. And I'm incredibly grateful that we decided, because your vibe creates your tribe. And you reaching out and emailing and private messaging and all of the ways that we can reach each other now, saying, boy, I sure miss you on KFI. I wish you were on the radio talking about these things. You know, don't go dark on us, put out podcasts. And I figured this was a fabulous hybrid. So it is Easter Eve, and we may never know about the days to come, but we think about them anyway, because we're not entirely certain what's going to happen. We're not. Nobody knows, which is why I'm not doing a ton of hard news stories. Here are facts. We're #1 in deaths. Woohoo! We've surpassed Italy. Wow! We've also flattened the curve significantly. In California, we have a stay in, you know, a shelter in that's been extended. All of our shows, and like Broadway is closed for X amount of time, Disneyland and the Pantages, etc., at least May 31st. So this is unprecedented. At that point, Disneyland will have been closed the majority of 3 months. Disneyland. And I know it sounds crazy, but these are the facts, because I hate to say it, but money, cash, is sometimes the hardest bottom line news. And you know, in San Francisco, they're saying they may not have full sporting events until late fall, closer to November. But that's just talk. We don't know that. But we do know. Fact. Disneyland and the Pantages Theater, and it couldn't have happened at a less opportune time. Hello, Hamilton is at the Pantages, and they have to give all that money back, because to get people to reschedule, and there's shows that are already sold out, and they can't add shows. It's not like we can take 2, 3, 3.5 months of our lives and just scoot them down the rail. That's not how this is going to work. It's just not. And I started realizing today how much we don't know and how much we do know, and what parts of that matter. What parts of what we know matter. How this is an absolute time of self-trust and self-realization. Now, I'm going to guess that every one of you has had your personal pandemic. You have had a time in your life, a season that lasted much longer than you expected it to. And that it was much harder, whether it was starting up a business or getting rid of a business or selling a house when you really needed the money. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, there are some news stories that I want to cover that were significant for me. One of them is that there was a private plane turned away today in the south of France, a jet. And this is such a combination of Me Too and the pandemic. Billionaires, men in their 40s and 50s, okay? And one of the girls, I believe, was a Croatian national. So they didn't say exactly how many people. They were turned away on the tarmac. They did not allow them to get off the plane. End of story. This is a great equalizer. A billionaire, several billionaires in their 40s and 50s with women in their 20s. All right? Yeah, those guys. You and I both know those guys are so used to getting their way. Guess what? Not today. France said, not today, billionaire private plane. You can take your hoochies and fly back to where you came from, which was London. And who knows where they came from before London. In Los Angeles, you cannot go in a store without a mask. It's not like appreciated. It is now, I don't know, you can't call it law. How fast can you pass a law? That's why I'm saying, what do we know? What's legal? What's not legal? The state of Tennessee has a governor who is Kentucky. And they said that if people went to church, they were going to take their license plates numbers. They were going to go through churches. There were only 7 or 8 in the state that were thinking of doing live, full mass. That they were going to, take license plates and run them and make people quarantine for 2 weeks. It's the Wild West. And when I say it's the Wild West, they can throw anything they want at us. Stimulus package, trillions of dollars. Every American, 9 out of 10 Americans is going to get a check. And you're wondering, it's a little bit like Passover. Why is tonight different than any other night? Why is pandemic different than we have 22 veterans a day on average that commit suicide? Where's the money to help them? See, these are the kind of questions that I ask, is that why now? Why this? What is happening that everybody's agreed in just this sort of societal civility that, you can't do certain things, period, full stop. You can't go in Walgreens without a face mask. I live in a nice building, and they were allowing, because the pool is large and the jacuzzi's a decent size, people to go in the pool, social distancing signs everywhere, and the jacuzzi. We get emails as, residents, and they had said repeatedly, we're discouraging guests. We've shut down, guest parking. We don't want you to bring people, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Can't use the pool or the jacuzzi right now because some buttwig decided that they were going to find some loophole in societal civility. Who are you going to sue? Who are you going to complain to? And invited 8 people, and it's big enough that you can space them out, and was having I'm going to guess, I'm just going out on a limb, that they are under 35 or even 30. And some buttwig decided to throw a social distancing party on the roof of the building, and now pool and jacuzzi shut down. So there's new rules and new laws and new abilities for the governing bodies of countries, not just our country, countries. Like France is saying, no thank you. The rich billionaire guy with your plane full of hoochies, because people pay to park their planes. It's a thing. You pay to park it, and you have to gas it up, and private planes are big business. And not to mention how much money the billionaires would have spent on their hoochies, but gone, right? And now the one of the representatives from the state of Kentucky, who is a Republican, was like chastising on Twitter the governor, saying, hey, you better walk it back. People should be able to worship how they want to worship. And I'm thinking, maybe, maybe, you know, I have a lot of faith, and I honestly don't think I'm going to get the virus. And I believe that if I got it, I wouldn't die of it. I don't even think I'd get that sick. But why? Why, if I'm that person who could potentially be the carrier that could accidentally infect a neighbor who is somebody with a challenged heart or lungs or something, why? Like, think about that. Think about the sort of construct and the agreements that we have as a civil society to keep each other safe and healthy. You know, the old, I'm not my brother's keeper. Guess what? In this situation, we are becoming our brothers and sisters' keeper. And I'm not sure I have a problem with that. I'm not sure that I'm upset by that. I'm not by any means a judgmental person, and I think that whenever you try to restrict people, it makes it worse. My dad always said that repression creates perversion. So, for the record, I do not drink, very rare. I'm not AA or anything, but a lot of my friends are friends of Bill W. because they know I'm the safest person to be around, because I always say, you know, people drink and do drugs to go where I live. You don't want me any less inhibited than I already am. In fact, people would give me a drug to be like, reel it in, simmer down, pump the brakes, Monique. But I've always said to myself, I would probably let them tighten up the margins on me a little bit if everybody else was respectful of having the margins tightened up a little bit. There's certain things that I just think aren't cool, and I would be willing to give up my right to ever do them. You know, I question these things since I was a child, because as a little girl, a lot of things got burnt. American flags got burnt. Draft cards got burnt. Bras got burnt. I mean, think about, you know, civil unrest and change and how that came about. Think about even just a few years ago, you know, Black Lives Matter and marches and clashes. And I think about right now how if the worst thing going on is that a few people want to take a chance with themselves and go to church, all right, am I for it? No. Do I think it's a bad idea? Hell yeah. But I think Klan marches are a bad idea, and people still do that. Believe it or not, in this country, still happens. You know, full on sheets and everything. And then I started thinking, as I'm going to duck down so you can see my ears. All right, there you got them. You got my ears? All right. So as I was thinking about Easter, this is a vintage dress that I've never worn before. I thought I want to feel Eastery. And then I started saying, well, what Easters did you feel Eastery besides your childhood Easters? My childhood Easters were a big deal. My family's very Catholic. And I'm going to tell you about 3 great Easters so that you can think about, you know, your own sort of, and I say these things because I'm sitting in front of, and I'll move to one side so you can see it. I bought a piece of furniture at a thrift store at a greatly reduced price. And it's a Jewish thrift store, and the piece came out of a church. And my friend Morty, he said, you know, Monique, it's been sitting here. It's very carved. It's ornate. It's expensive. It's heavy. And I like you. So I'm going to give you a great deal. And everybody that comes in my house says, oh, you have your own personal altar. And I hadn't realized I kind of do. I'm not a church person, but there's something about the energy of faith and religious iconography that is fascinating to me. Because let's face it, the greatest wars, the most deaths, the most beautiful structures, you know, Notre Dame, it's because of war and religion. And, you know, when you think about the fighting of my guy, you know, my imaginary friend is more powerful and important than your imaginary friend. Because faith is a lot about imagination. When I was a child, people would look at my parents and shake their head, and not always in a complimentary way. Even when I was little, I could feel it and go, boy, that's some imagination on that kid. And imagination is about believing and creating something in your mind that you can't see. Isn't that another definition for faith? I mean, imagination. Maybe people with amazing imaginations have faith. Now, they say the higher the IQ, the less religious you are. I can go with that too. Einstein was culturally Jewish, but he wasn't a religious guy, and yet he had enormous faith. So I define terms because I want people to understand that although I'm sitting in front of a, religious relic filled with religious relics, it's because of the energy of, I have a whole bunch of Madonnas, and if I opened all the drawers and pulled stuff out, it's quite interesting. But I have things from all kinds of religions and totems, because it really comes down to something being a personal totem, something having an effect on you that vibrates and raises you. In fact, I believe that my friend Claudia is watching in Miami, and we've been friends since 1984. And when we were very young girls, she gave me this finger puppet. Here it is, because that's how we rolled in our early 20s. And this means so much to me that whenever I have a small moisturizer or a favored lipstick, I always manage to have a home for the finger puppet. So wherever I go for 30 plus years, he's gone with me. And I also have this tin of Easter candy, just because it's beautiful, and I have a fascination and fixation on tins. And every Easter, I put this out, and here's how anal retentive I am. I actually saved the wrappers of the chocolate bars because it was such a fabulous Easter that I just wanted to remember it. I wanted to remember what it felt like to get this beautiful tin. And I don't use it as a pencil box, because usually I use my tins as a pencil box. But there's something about this that instantly brings me back to all of my childhood Easters and all of my best Easter baskets. I told you I was going to tell you the story of 3 Easters, and now there might be 3 and a half, because my first recollection of how important Easter was that when I was a very little girl in kindergarten, so we're talking 60s, my parents gave me a bunny, a real bunny, an albino. He was white with red eyes, and I named him Harvey because I somehow remember seeing the movie of Harvey and the imaginary rabbit friend, and I think it was Jimmy Stewart that had the imaginary friend Harvey. And Harvey lived to be very old, and he died of natural causes. And rabbits do not make great pets. My parents were incredibly patient with me and Harvey as long as I had him. Number one, you have to have like a rabbit cage with chicken wire, and number 2, they poop little balls in all kinds of places that you find later if you let them run loose in your bedroom. So that was a good Easter. That was only half a story. Now I'm going to tell you the good stories. Okay, so my most spiritual Easter, my most important Easter, and it's actually tied into 9/11, and I'll try not to curse or cry, but I'm not making any promises. We've already said this show isn't for kids. In 2000, I think I'm gonna cry. In 2003, I was struggling. I lived in an apartment in Koreatown. I had bald tires and bad credit and just a myriad of problems. And I was 39 years old, and I was dating somebody who was affluent, a person who had money. And I don't want to go into too much detail about the person, but the person, it was a long distance relationship, and I made all the effort. I would drive out of my way a lot during gigs and cross-country drives to see this person. And when I went to their home, they were always happy to see me and were a wonderful host, but something wasn't right. Number one, as much as I traveled and visited, they were absolutely very vocal about me not leaving so much as a hairbrush there. Well, of course, that's a bad sign. Duh, right? Duh. And secondly, it just didn't go any further. There was just this sort of stasis. And there is no stasis on a physical plane. That's why I even tell people, you're kidding yourself if you think that you can be in a relationship that's quote unquote friends with privileges, because there is no stasis. You're either going back or going forward. And if you're going forward, the relationship is escalating and somebody's getting more attached than somebody else, and at some point it's going to blow up in your face. It just doesn't work. This wasn't friends with privileges. We were exclusively dating, but there was a go away closer. There was an arms, I felt like I was being Heisman'd, you know? But, you know, I start telling these stories and then I go, why did you commit to this, Monique? And you'll know if I change stories in the middle, so I can't do that. So I had this person, and this person was successful and affluent and a wonderful host when I was there and kept in touch, but they had the relationship right where they wanted it, which was not where I wanted it. And I was booked to play in Edmonton, Canada. Okay, Edmonton. Edmonton is 1,800 miles away from Los Angeles. And just so you know, for my old apartment, it was 2 left turns. That's it. Because you basically go west on the 10, take a left on the 15, and I had to take a turn to get onto the 10, you know, and then take a left on the 15, and then you go. You just go. And you go up through Vegas and Salt Lake City, and you go and you go and you go, and then when you cross the border to Canada, it turns into the 2, you keep going, Calgary, Edmonton. And this trip was one of those trips where I knew that it wasn't about the 1,800-mile drive. It wasn't about listening to Eminem the whole time. By the way, one of these days I'm going to do car karaoke and I'm going to crush it with My Daddy's Gone Crazy. I'm going to crush it, you know. 9mm heater stashed in 2-seaters. Anyway, no, we'll do that another time. But I wouldn't let Haley listen to me neither. So I drove up, and now I'm going to backtrack to pull it together. I was in Edmonton, Canada, right after 9/11, and my friend Andrew, who's a comedian, had rescued a dog named Bear. And Bear was a difficult dog for a multitude of reasons that I'll tell you later in the story. And I loved Bear. And in September of 2001, I told Andrew, if you don't want Bear, I'll take him. Because he said that adopting Bear almost ended his marriage. Like, his wife was a cat person, she hated the dog had, you know, abandonment issues and anxieties and barked incessantly and blah, blah, blah. But the dog took to me, and I said, I'll take him. And he said, nope. So now, here we are. And it's 2003, and it's early April, and I'm driving north, and I'm in an old BMW that's a great 5-speed 328. This car was the bomb. I drove it 88,000 miles. I only had to change the oil and 1 set of tires, 1 set of brakes. Fram filter, carried them myself in the trunk. And I'm driving up the 15 and I'm crushing it. I had a great lunch in Vegas with my girlfriend Haley. And then I'm just power driving. And I'm almost to the Canadian border. I am in Dutton. I am in Dutton, Montana. I still have the card. I'm in Dutton, Montana. And the car just goes haywire and the lights go on. And I managed to coast and drift down and take a left turn. And there are 2 ancient buildings that look like something out of, you know, gun smoke. And I coast into one, and I said, my car just died here. And these 2 super old dudes that were evidently challenged, said, well, we have a tow truck driver, but he's busy right now, but we'll call him. And they called the tow truck driver, and the tow truck driver said, I'm going to have to drive you back to Great Falls, Montana. And it's not a very huge distance. And he drove me back to Great Falls. And it was me and my dog Vinny in my lap, and the tow truck driver, who had so many wrinkles. Like, you could not find a space on his face with the sharpest of pencils that didn't have a wrinkle. And he was telling me stories about how he was the hot guy in town, that since his wife had died, everybody, you know, showed up with casseroles, and that he had remarried, and that he regretted it, and that although he was ready to end his time as the hot widow, it was not what he had thought, because we were just being honest with each other. And I started to cry, and he said, oh honey, don't cry, we're gonna get your car fixed. I said, that's not why I'm crying. He said, why are you crying? Well, it's because he told me about how much he had loved his wife, his first wife, and how he rushed to get married the second time because of the fact that all of the casseroles and Dutton, Montana Nani weren't filling the hole of missing his first wife. So he picked the best candidate and married her. But he told me that his first wife was a tiny little woman who went on every tow truck run with him, no matter how long, and that he would always rest his arm on the top of her head while he was driving, and that he just adored her. And I could hear in his voice the longing and how much he loved her. And I was like, what the heck am I doing with this ninny? You know, the go away closer guy. I call him non-committal man. I give everybody nicknames. I'll talk about that another day. And so we told each other our truths on the drive to Great Falls. And when I got to Great Falls, it turned out that it needed a serpentine belt that they had to overnight from Seattle. And thank goodness they had it. And thank goodness I had just a little teeny tiny bit of money that I could check into a Ramada that took dogs. And, Super 8 took dogs. La Quintas and Super 8s. I knew every hotel that took dogs, and I knew, there's things you know when you're a road comic, who had the best beef jerky, whether it was pemmican or Jack Link's. I knew who had good creamers. Texaco had the flavored creamers. It was a life. It was a life, and it was my life, and it was an honest life and a good life, and a fun adventure. I made up in adventure what I lacked in money and good credit. So I was here at the Super 8, and he was kind enough to say, well, since you don't have a car, I'll run you over to the Walmart to get a couple of packs of dog food, and if you want some company, we can run over to the VFW or whatever, and it was someplace that even had pull tabs, and get a burger. I know they have a spot where they have good burgers. And I said, all right, let's do it. And we went, and we had burgers, and he bought some pull tabs, and he took me back, and me and Vinny were good. And the next morning, they came and picked me up from the garage, and I drove north, back through Dutton, and I saw their little off-ramp, and I kept going, and I saw one of the most beautiful things I ever saw. I saw people talk about 18-point bucks. This thing had a Christmas tree on its head, and it was just a few feet from the highway. There was just this very narrow fence, like barbed wire, like he could have walked onto the highway, and he had just dipped his head to drink and shook it, and it was like slow motion glistening of drops. And I thought, wow, I just saw that. It's gonna be a glorious and perfect day. And I made it to Edmonton with seconds to spare, and I ran on stage, and I did the show with Andrew. We were doing a show called Stag and Doe Comedy Show, like a he said, she said. And I knew when I saw the stag that it was a good sign, that it was going to go well. And so I get to the show, and the first thing I say to Andrew, we had a show in Calgary and then Edmonton. I say, so Andrew, how's Bear? And he says, for F's sake, but he's Canadian, so he calls me Monique. So he goes, for F's sake, Monique, that dog's been like a challenge and blah, 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 and we still have him, and the kids love him, but Carol hates him. I was like, okay, that's a shame. I hate hearing that. if you decide you want me to take him, I'll take him. So that was April 13th of 2003. I know that because it was the Sunday before Easter of that year. And I had a run through Canada, through Edmonton and Calgary and a couple of small towns with the Stag and Doe comedy show. And on Saturday, the 19th of April, 2003, I said to Andrew, how's Bear? You know, do you hate him any less this week? He said, Monique, if you can take that dog, I'll give him to you. But if you can't keep him, don't give him back. Because we've already given him to a farmer, and we gave him to somebody else who said he had allergies. We've gotten that dog back 2 times. And I said, 3's a charm. And I don't know what they did or who they called, because you had to have a certificate to take him over the border. But on a late Saturday night, the 19th of April, his wife Carol got the paperwork so that I could take Bear over the border on Easter Sunday. And I met him in the parking lot of a hotel in Edmonton on Easter Sunday morning. And the first thing Bear did was go poop. And he pooped in a weird way. He would spin. So you would always know when Bear went to the restroom, because it would look like Stonehenge. And he pooped, and then he put the pillow on the back of my luggage, which was very high. And Bear's eyes were equal to my eyes in the rear view mirror. He had big brown sad eyes. And he sat on top of this burgundy cushion on top of my luggage, looking at me in the rear view. And I made him a promise. I said, as God is my witness, like Scarlett O'Hara. It was Easter Sunday, 2003. I said, you will die in my arms. You will belong to no other. And I will love you till your last breath, Bear. Hear me now. And that's when you know I'm serious. If I'm ever in a conversation with you and I say, hear me now, that means that's even stronger than I've decided and declared. Hear me now equals, whoa. And we're going to talk about the old expression, you know, come to Jesus. So I drove home on a sacred Easter Sunday. Me and Bear in the back, you know, Bear in the back, me in the front, Vinny in the passenger seat, Vinny Moscatelli. That was my other road dog that I had for 17 years. And I had a red BMW that I bought at an auction, and evidently it looked like a, you know, drug dealer car. So as soon as we were trying to get over the border, they emptied out all my luggage and took the car apart and did all of that. So that was mine and Bear's first experience of crossing the border. But I was undaunted. And when I called non-committal man, he basically told me that I was an idiot. He was like, I can't believe that you took on another responsibility when you have nothing. You're almost 40 years old, and you're not skinny, you're not blonde, you're not what anybody's looking for, and now you've saddled yourself with a responsibility in your little apartment, which I was allowed to have Vinny, you know, in Koreatown. I mean, not that I was worried anybody would eat the dogs, I'm just saying. I had a little apartment in a not great neighborhood of LA. Now it's been gentrified. And I just felt like, you know what? Bear loves me like that old man, that tow truck driver loved his wife. And in my mind, I was thinking, you don't. I choose Bear. Well, I adopted Bear April the 20th. Me and non-committal man broke up within 6 weeks, and that was probably 2 visits because I traveled and it was a long distance relationship. But here's what happened, because it wasn't just like, I don't want to see you anymore. Oh no, it was epic, because this is what happened. I can't even believe the details that come into my head, because I remember every little part of it as I'm telling it to you. I had Bear, and I was good. And then I got a 3-day quit notice that said that I had to get rid of Bear or give up the apartment. And I did not have the money to get another apartment. I didn't have the deposits. I mean, I was screwed, kind of like everybody is now, but that's what I'm saying. This is not new to me. I was screwed. And And I called a girlfriend of mine in Vegas named Haley. And I said, Haley, I have to go on a trip. Can I? And I remember I was doing a Willie Barcena gig in some taco restaurant on a Monday night, like a week later. So it was like end of April, May 1st. And I called her and I said, can I drive over and drop my dog off until I can figure out what to do? And she's an amazing friend. She said, yeah, do it. So I cannonballed. I drove to Vegas, dropped Bear, brought him back. I had a very difficult gig I had to do. I had to fly to Florida and do this run that barely paid. And at the time, my ex-husband was giving me travel vouchers for Delta. We were still legally married, and I got buddy passes, and that was when you actually had a voucher and you would fly non-rev. And to save money, I was trying to get to Florida on non-rev, but what that meant was that, I might not get there. It was a real rolling of the bones. So I get to LAX, it's early May, and non-committal man's calling me and scolding me and saying, I suppose you expect me to bail you out and help you when you've made a mistake and you're about to get evicted. And I'm thinking, no, I didn't. And here's his further proposal. As you're not skinny, you're not blonde, you're not what anybody's looking for. And then this is his like, oh, thank you, Mr. Romance. This is his second lead in, which is as I'm at the airport, I've missed 2 flights. I've got 2 more shots. And then I'm not going to make it in time to do the gig. And he says, well, here's what I can't do. I can't help you and have you, living in some condo, and then you break up with me and now you're just my tenant. And I can't have you move here with me to save money, and then it's just a crash pad and you're still a road comic. And after about the 3rd or 4th can't, I said, I'm at LAX. I've missed 2 flights. I've got a 3-day quit notice. I can't hear can't anymore. I can't. I can't. Just say one positive thing. Say one good thing. Say, I can keep talking to you. I can understand why you adopted this dog. You're a soft touch. Whatever it is that you need to say. But I can't hear can't. Well, I want to back up a piece of the story, because it's like that Paul Harvey. Prior to calling Haley on the phone, because it's very hard for me to ask a favor or help, everybody called me when they heard about the 3-day quit. My mother, my friend, a few people called me, and they said, how much can you love the dog? Well, there was some weird destiny in my soul that I had loved the dog since September of 2001. And here it was the spring of 03, and he was finally mine, and I had made him a promise. And, my mom was like, just take it to a shelter. It'll get a good home. He's a beautiful dog. Well, he was beautiful, but he was difficult. And just give him up, give him up. And it was one of those Scarlett O'Hara's. I said, it's not about the dog. I'm 39 years old. I have nothing to show for my life. And it's not about the dog, but it is about the dog. And as God is my witness, if I have to live in my car with my 2 dogs, I will not surrender that dog. I made a promise to that dog. And I did. And I meant it. Just like when I say I'm going to show up at 3:30 for 40 days, I'm going to do it, ladies and gentlemen. Because that's how I roll. And just to make sure that I was extra super duper depressed, I put on Tom Waits, because that's what you have to do. When you're about to put a ballpoint pen through your heart, you got to listen to Tom Waits. Why wasn't God watching? Not even his original album, Mule Variations. So then I do the cannonball, and I get to the airport, and I make a decision. And I get on the last flight. I slept at LAX, on the floor of LAX. I made the last flight that could potentially get me to rent a car in Fort Lauderdale, which is mile marker 20 on I-95, and drive to Melbourne, mile marker 180. So I'm going to tell you right now, I broke a lot of laws. A lot. Speeding, weaving. It was bad. And I was still wearing the dress that I'd slept on the floor, and the makeup. I just did a Cuban dry clean and a little spackle repair, and it was on. And then I got home to LA, and I went to my next gig in Indianapolis, and I was offered a job to do radio for 6 figures. Within 6 weeks of adopting Bear, I was offered a radio gig. And that's what happened. And I'm absolutely certain that it's because when I was on the floor of my apartment saying it's not about the dog, I have a thing that I do, and I'm inviting you to do it right now, while we're here together. And you can send me, I can't see them because the way the camera's turned, but I'm going to figure out how to watch you watch me on my other device. I'm going to do it, I promise. But, you know, my girlfriend Deborah and I have this thing where we say, where are you? And where are you? I'll tell you the little backstory. I might not get to the other stories. I apologize in advance, but for another day. I'm sorry I probably belabored this one, but I feel like it's important, and I always do what I think is important. And when I was a road comic in the 90s, my car broke down outside of El Paso. I was on the 10 and there was nothing for a very, very, very long way on either side. If anybody's ever been to West Texas, even now there's nothing. And this guy pulled up behind at the time I had a Jeep Cherokee. And I remember thinking, you know, if you decide you want to rape and kill me, all right, my bad. I should have listened to everybody and been safer or more careful. But I had one of those old cell phones under my seat for safety, the big giant ones that you never use because they were so expensive. But I pulled out that phone, and my girlfriend Deborah said, where are you? Where are you? And I said, Debs, this isn't New York. I can't walk out and say I'm on Lex and blah. You know, where am I? I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm on the corner of, you know, Trucker and Sodomy. I mean, that's where I am. And we couldn't stay on the phone because the satellite phone was so expensive. But she said, whenever you get to a gas station, call me, and I'm going to put 2 new tires on your car, and you can pay me back when you can. And a trucker came behind me, a young man, and he changed my tire. And it was incredibly difficult because the lug nuts were frozen, and he had to jump up and down on the crowbar, and you know, it was a deal. And then he followed me to make sure I got there safely. And this was before you could just post something on YouTube. And I hope if you remember me and you find me, because people have found me, Trucker Man, and I'm actually going to look through because we exchanged business cards, whatever, business card, like mine had my name and phone number. I said, I'll give you comedy VHSs. I said, you know, God loves comedians and you're helping me. And we exchanged information, and I mailed him VHS tapes of my comedy. I would love to see them myself, to be honest. And we corresponded for a very short amount of time in the mid-90s. So that's where are you comes. And when I was on the floor, and I'm telling you this now for a reason. I didn't bury the lead. I wanted it to have the full force of the story behind it. As I was on the floor listening to Tom Waits, shaking my fist in the air, saying it's not about the dog, with my other arm wrapped around Bear's neck, Deborah said, where are you? And I had this crazy moment of clarity, like just like that, like extraneous everything went away. And it's like that diamond bullet at the end of Apocalypse Now. And I realized that I had personal beliefs, core issues about myself, that I was quirky and niche, and that I was going to make it, but it was going to be harder because people don't recognize my genius as readily as they recognized others. So I was on the corner of, I'm going to make it, but it's going to take a minute because I'm quirky and I'm not like other people. And when I realized that that was my core belief about myself, in that instant, for the love of Bear, I just went, I am on the corner of people love what I do and opportunity is coming quickly. I've moved. I don't live in that old neighborhood anymore, Debs. I am on the corner of Bam and Bam. I changed my intersection. Pow! And within a few weeks of that moment, I went from almost living in my car and struggling to keep up with my apartment in Koreatown to a 6-figure job in Indianapolis. I'm going to say his name, Jimmy Steele, program director for MS at the time and Power and Hot in New York. A brilliant man offered me a job and changed my life. Flipped an entire format. Real 97.1, real talk, real music. My love of Bear flipped an entire radio format for us. And we moved to Indy and we had a wonderful run, and that's another story. And I feel like, enough about me. I hope that that story will let you know truly in your heart how I feel about reinvention, resurrection, rising from your lowest point, living in the not knowing. If you can live with the not knowing, it could very possibly turn out way better than you expected. It goes back to anticipation. It goes back to this being Easter Eve. At the very end of anticipation. And I know you're not going to believe me, but she says, Carly Simon, she says, I'm going to stay right here because these are the good old days. And when I was on the ground, I didn't think that was a good old day. I really didn't. But as I've told you the story, it was a great day because it was a hard day. But that's what it takes sometimes to see who you really are and what you're made of. That's what it takes sometimes to completely shift, to get rid of every single non-essential, unimportant thought and belief you ever had about what you can and can't do, and what's real and what isn't real, and what's news and what's just information. That's what it takes sometimes. So, I gotta be honest with you. I really enjoyed telling you guys that story because it did something to me again in the retelling of the tale of how, I've had, who knows when I'm going to be back on a cruise ship. This is the big shrug. It isn't going to be before May 31st. That's for sure. Shrug. Who knows? We don't know how they're going to roll us out. I was saying on my Monday through Friday, and please, if you have the time and the inclination, I'm on Facebook Live on Pacific Time, 3:30, Monique Marvez official fan page. It's kind of like touching lightly on what we talked about tonight. Tonight's the deep dive, the bigger stories. So if you can join me, I would love that. But in the telling of the tale, it has reminded me that we don't know how our folk fast, that's what I called it on the Monday through Friday, we're on a fast from other folks. Dr. Fauci is saying that handshakes should never come back. I don't know how I feel about that. I think handshakes are like as American as apple pie. Shake on it. In fact, how many of us have seen a TV show where the biggest insult was that one guy refused to shake another guy's hand? So what are we going to do now? Is it like a wave? Is it a namaste? I got to be honest with you. I respect the Dalai Lama, but I don't think guys are going to be walking around in nice suits and ties going like, nice to see you, Chuck. It's great to see you too, Bob. It's just funny to me. What are we going to do? I don't know. We don't know. We'll figure it out. Maybe it's a salute. Maybe we bring salutes back. I'd be good with that. Yeah, I could do that. The end of JoJo's Starbuck. Today, you do what did I just say that? The end of JoJo Starbuck? I mean, JoJo Starbuck was a skater. I meant Jojo Rabbit. You do what you can. I'm not going to tell you anything about it if you haven't seen it. It's amazing. So I touched on a couple of things tonight. You know, your vibe creates your tribe. I have found and rediscovered and been delighted by people in my tribe that I had lost touch with that are meeting me at 3:30 every day. People I went to high school with in Miami and Texas. And I wanted to show this because not everybody was on the 3:30 show. For the record, I don't do, you know, a lot of talk about religion and politics in public because I don't even do it in private. And from the beginning of me being on the radio and even being a stand-up, people would come up to me because I guess people always want to know if I'm on their team. So when I started stand-up, I would always order a Diet Coke or a cup of coffee or whatever, and inevitably some comic would come up and look around furtively and go, "Are you a friend of Bill W?" And they would whisper it like that, like, "Are you a friend of Bill W?" Well, I said, look, after a while, I was like, I don't know who this Bill W is. But since I started in comedy and, you know, 30 years ago, I was pretty cute. I was like the hot chick, you know. I said, look, the way they were doing it and looking around, I said, I don't know who this Bill W is, but if he says that we were in a comedy condo or we hung out or I showed him my boobs or something, I'm going to kick his ass. Because you're like the 5th person that's asked me, like, who is Bill W? Well, it turns out that Bill W is code for, are you in AA? One of the founders was Bill W. And that's how you ask if somebody's in the program. Are you a friend of Bill's? For the record, if somebody's gay, are you a friend of Dorothy's? If you're a friend of Bill's and Dorothy's, well, that's something to say. So once I got on the radio, people would call and they would say, are you a Christian? You sound like a Christian. Are you a Christian? And I would say, who wants to know? Well, I do. Why? Are you going to like me more or are you going to like me less? Well, you know, I'll like you more or I'll like you less or whatever it was. And my answer was always, because there are people that lived. You know, Dalai Lama lived. The Dalai Lama is alive, and there were other Dalai Lamas before this one. There's Rumi lived. You know, Muhammad lived. These are people. Jesus Christ lived on earth. Whether you believe he's whatever people say he is your business. But there's no doubt that he lived and he was a prophet. So I would always answer, this is my standardized answer, you can never go wrong living a Christ-like life. I thought that was a nice answer. Any more than you can go wrong living any kind of positive life. Any kind of enlightened life that brings you to trusting yourself, believing in something bigger, and loving your neighbor. These are all good things. You can't go wrong. So I have a friend who's a wonderful artist and a fan and a listener. And she, you know, and in fact, I always feel it's weird, and I'll come back to that in a minute. You know, the words apostle or disciple, or, you know, when I started being on social media, the word follower felt very peculiar to me, because to me a follower is like you follow a philosopher, a prophet, a mindset, a belief structure. For people to follow you, where are you leading them? What does that even mean? So every time I would say like so-and-so is following you, you know, it felt peculiar, like why? Who is, you know, all I could think of was a disciple, you know, and then they give little stars when people really become super fans, and that just, a little diamond, and it just feels peculiar. But let's just say she is a friend, a fan, a follower, and a disciple to some degree, and she painted me this rock, which I want to make sure you can see clearly. She painted me this rock that has a beautiful face of Jesus on the front of just a simple smooth stone, and on the back she took the time, and it'd probably be backwards, to write, you can never go wrong living a Christ-like life. And here's how I'm going to prove that I'm not a religious person. This rock resonates and brings me joy as much as this does, because this has the sacredness of a beautiful, loving friendship. This has the sacredness of a beautiful, loving friendship. They are symbols, they are totems, they are relics. They remind me of something that I want to be reminded of. And I don't think that you need to go into a crowded building and risk your health and the health of other people to accomplish that. I don't. But as they say, to each his own. You know, I don't know how I feel about, you know, the state of Kentucky wasting the resources and the manpower and the hours to take down people's license plates. I'm delighted that France, you know, sent those billionaires and their hoochies packing and didn't allow their private plane to land. I'm delighted that the curve is being flattened. I'm delighted that it would appear that and I don't want to talk out of turn, but I would, you know, that some parts of the country are not being heavily affected, and that they are, I've read several stories where they're now sending in an orderly fashion things that are needed from parts of the country where they're not being used, which earlier in the month, because we're already on the 11th, they were hoarding in case it got to them. You know, they were saying, I'm not sending my ventilators. What if it comes to BFE? What if we get this in East Jesus, Georgia? But now in an orderly fashion, things are being moved more quickly. Now, there were a couple of stories that I found a little bit challenging, and I'd like your feedback. One of them is that Sandra Bullock donated an enormous amount, you know, I don't know if it was 90,000 masks or $90,000 worth of masks. There's a lot of masks. And again, I'm not sitting here looking at news stories because this isn't that kind of situation. I'm not actually on a talk radio station. And also that Jay-Z was donating masks to prison populations, which I think is fantastic. Having been, in prison himself, I'm sure that he realizes that that's as much an at-risk community as, you know, the homeless or the elderly. So yeah, if you're in there for late child support payments, you don't deserve to die. And I don't believe in sort of the thinning of the herds mentality. I think that that's a wonderful thing. Here was the head scratch for me. I didn't realize that being able to get your hands on these masks was just a matter of money. That your ability to pay for them and donate them is what would make something happen. And maybe that's naive of me. But if we're able to release trillions of dollars, you know, $1 trillion, $2 trillion, it doesn't matter. Once it's $1 trillion, it's $1 trillion. But if things can happen where we can lock down a state, where we can demand that people not go to church, where we can, you know, if we can do that, why can't they? And I realize we live in a capitalist country, but does it come down to just being able to buy the protection? Are we still there? You know, 5 weeks into this, are we still at whoever has the money gets the better stuff? Are we still there? I hope not. Whatever Sandra Bullock did, I'm sure I have no issue with her or what she did. It's an amazing thing. But it was a head scratch for me is, where are these masks being hidden, hoarded, kept from view, that other people can't purchase them? That a movie star can put up a ton of money and buy these masks. Why isn't the government just saying, hey, no more withholding? That ship sailed. If you've got these, put them on the table. You know? I think of the French Connection with Popeye Doyle. You know, just saying, hey, if anybody's holding, now's your chance. And everybody just plunking drugs on the bar. You know, whatever you've got. If you've got these kind of gloves and you're not using them, if you're a beauty salon and you don't need these to dye hair, whatever you've got, put it on the counter. It belongs to the group now. Just a thought. Wouldn't that be a great Easter basket? I found toilet paper today, and wait for it. Let's bring it on home. I'm not going to allow myself an entire basket or a beautiful box of chocolates this year because I haven't been working out as much as I usually do, and I'm going to make an appointment with myself. But those are harder to keep. It sounds funny, but I've always been one of those people that can do more for the love of another person or even a dog. But maybe that's what has to change now. Maybe that is the core. Maybe I'm actually going to learn, put the mask on yourself first. See how I did that? See how I saved that? Put the mask on yourself first. Mallow peeps, it's Easter Eve or whatever. You know, it's the first day of Passover was a couple nights ago. It's whatever you're celebrating, including anticipation. Just celebrating being in a free fall, in a moment where nobody knows anything more than you do. I assure you that it's all models. I went on the news today, and this is all that's in the news, and it's all forecasts and models and real time, and you know, as many people as we thought were going to die may not die, and then you hear in the information, but the ones that do are going to die alone. Well, ultimately we all die alone in some way. Maybe this is the way we're going to have to say goodbye to people for a little while. But I'm going to say goodbye to you the way I always do. Love hard, forgive harder, and get as happy as you can, as fast as you can.